2 million bankruptcy cases a year in the United States, nearly all of them involving individuals who elected to go bust rather than meet their obligations. In medieval Italy, or in the Glasgow of my youth for that matter, bankruptcy was seen as a disaster. But not here.
In fact, this ability to walk away unscathed from unsustainable debt and start all over again has been a defining characteristic of American capitalism. There were no debtors' prisons here in the early 1800s, at a time when English debtors could languish in jail for years. Since 1898, every American has been entitled to file for Chapter 7, liquidation, or Chapter 13, voluntary personal reorganization. For rich and poor alike, bankruptcy has become as much of an inalienable right as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
The theory is that American law exists to encourage entrepreneurship, to facilitate the creation of new businesses. And that means giving people a break when things don't work out the first time or even the second time. The born risk-takers don't get wiped out as they learn through trial and error how to make that first million. Because today's bankrupt might be tomorrow's billionaire. It's a theory that seems to work. Many of America's greatest successes failed in their early endeavors, including the author Mark Twain, the comedian Buster Keaton, and none other than the great industrialist Henry Ford himself. All of these men eventually flourished, not least because they were given a chance to try, fail, and start over. For their part, the banks simply assume that a proportion of the loans they make will go bad. After all, most people going bankrupt owe relatively trivial sums. And Chapter 13 doesn't wipe their debts out. It just reschedules them. So it's a mistake to think, as Shakespeare's Antonio did, of moneylenders as mere leeches sucking the life's blood out of unfortunate debtors. Credit and debt are the building blocks of economic development, but it takes banks to elevate that relationship beyond the tie between a loan shark and his hapless victim.
It's only when borrowers like the ones on this Glasgow housing estate have access to efficient credit markets that they can escape the clutches of the Shylocks and the loan sharks. It's only when savers can put their money in dependable banks that it can be channeled from the idle to the industrious.
But wait, I hear you ask. If banks are the answer, how could so many have collapsed so spectacularly in the past year, throwing the financial world into turmoil? To understand why bad debts in places like Memphis could cause such chaos, you need to understand how the relationship between banks and borrowers broke down as loans came to be securitized and sold on to unwary investors.
Once upon a time, being a banker was really rather boring. You lived by the 3-6-3 rule, which meant you paid 3% on deposits, collected 6% on loans, and were on the golf course by 3 o'clock. But in our time, banking became really rather too interesting. A whole series of financial innovations made it possible for common or garden loans to poor folks in places like Memphis to metamorphose into weird and wonderful things with names like collateralized debt obligations. Well, this financial alchemy, turning lead into gold or toxic waste into gilt-edged securities, was only possible because the ascent of banks was followed by the ascent of the second great pillar of the modern financial system, the bond market.
And for an explanation of how that came about, we'll turn to Mr. Bond himself.